Good morning. My name is Katie Statton. Today I'm going to be talking to you about subconscious gender bias in high school teachers. So you might be asking, what is subconscious bias? And I asked myself the same question at the beginning of the school year. Subconscious bias is when external factors affect a person's ability to be neutral when looking at a certain characteristic of a person, like gender or race. How does it affect students? I mean, fairly obviously, it creates an environment that might be different for one student, different than the other. And there is really no good way to fix it at this point in time, but the best way to make steps to improve it is to identify it. So that's what I'm working towards. In my research, I used the attributional bias instrument to identify it, which broke down whether a teacher believed their students would fail or succeed based on effort or ability in the classroom. And I broke this into male and female students. Oops. Okay, so this leads me to my important sources. The first one, establishing the content of gender stereotypes across development. It looked at elementary age students and asked the teachers gender-based questions like most likely to play with toy trucks on the playground or most likely to wear a tutu to school and questions like that. And this is what sparked my interest in the field. I wanted to do something like this, but I wanted it to be applicable to me and my peers. The second source looked at the gender-related beliefs of teachers in elementary school mathematics. And it discovered whether the elementary age math teachers were biased towards their students and whether they believed they would succeed or fail in the classroom. And I wanted to take this a step further. I wanted to figure out why they believed their students would succeed or fail. And that's when I found the attributional bias instrument. The instrument is used to determine whether the teacher believes their students would fail or succeed because of ability or effort. This source was crucial in my research because it taught me how to use the ABI and what the ABI was good for determining. This leads me to my research. What did I do? My research question was, how does the familial gender of a high school educator affect their perceptions of students based on gender? This basically is asking, how does your family affect the way you look at students and their genders? My hypotheses were that the ABI results will be affected by the gender of their family members, and that the gender of their siblings and children will have the most effect on their ABI results. My method was 2 steps. The first was a survey. The survey had 3 parts. The first part was the informed consent. I integrated this into my survey so that it was 1 step and that they all just had 1 survey to complete and they wouldn't forget to do the next parts. So the informed consent just basically told them what was happening with their data, how it would be treated, that I'd present it all anonymously and no one would feel persecuted for what they believe. The next section was the familial gender section. I asked really basic questions like the gender of their siblings and their children if they had any, if they had a predominantly male family or if they related more to the females in their family, questions like that. I decided to come up with these questions on my own so that I would have a baseline of what I wanted to ask versus what other people have asked in the past. The third and final section of my survey was the attributional bias instrument. It has 32 questions and it splits into 4 subcategories of 8 questions each. These 8 questions go into failure ability, failure effort, success ability, and success effort. And that is what I used to determine what the teacher believed their students were capable of based on their gender. The next step in my research was to observe classrooms within my own school. I decided to stay within my school because of time and resource constraints. When I walked into my first classroom, I had no idea what to look for. I've only been a student in a class. I've never taught a class. I didn't know how to observe a class. I didn't know what to look for. And my first 10 minutes in that class sounded exactly like what's going through my head right now. It was chaos. I wrote down everything that I saw, and after 10 minutes, I told myself, I can't do this. I can't look for everything in that classroom. So I broke down, and I said, what would I feel affects my education if I were a student in this classroom? What would change the way that I perceived what was being taught? And so I decided to focus on that. The first things on this list are just basic questions like the gender of the teacher and how many students of each gender in the class, because that would ultimately define what the data told me. But the next questions, like how many students were called on, how many students felt comfortable to ask questions, those were the things that I believed that would have the most effect on the education of the student in the class. So what did I get from this? I did my survey first, so I decided to do those results first. So these graphs, I know they're kind of scary. I have a lot of them. But you can see on this side, the 5.0 is a female response, the 5.0 is a male response, and the 1.0 is a female response. So a 3 is neutral, so anything along this line is a neutral score for the subsection. And then the horizontal axis shows each individual participant average. So we see here the biggest noticeable trend that we see is the failure effort and success effort. Failure effort and success effort, with the exception of 3 participants, every teacher out of the 58 said that male students are likely to fail because of effort and female students are likely to succeed because of effort, which was a really interesting finding. I wasn't expecting that when I started my research. The next trend that we see on this slide is that male teachers tend to have the most polar results out of all of them. And there is a fewer number of male teachers than female teachers, but this didn't surprise me as the teaching field is predominantly female. So my next question on the familiar gender portion of the survey asked for the parental marital status of the teacher. I wanted to include this question because I think that how your parents raised you has a lot of effect on you as a person. But I was actually really shocked to find out that almost all of my participants had parents that were married and never divorced, which makes it really hard to analyze this data because there's not enough of the others to really analyze the difference. The next question asked if they had sons. So we see again that the success effort and failure effort sections have that trend, and that failure ability and success ability, those that do have sons tended to be more neutral, which goes against my original hypothesis that they would have more of an effect. So that's really all there is on this slide. Again, this goes against my hypothesis because those without sons have the most polar responses on all 4 sections. The next question asked if the participant had daughters. The majority did not have daughters, which did surprise me. I figured it would be more of an even split. However, those that did not have daughters have the most polar responses out of everyone on this slide. This was very surprising. I figured those that had daughters would favor females and that they would do a more male response for failure ability and failure effort and a more female response for success ability and success effort. The next question asked if they had siblings. This is a roughly even distribution, which was really helpful for my data. And the biggest trend here is that those with brothers and sisters, this red line here, they have the most polar results, but they go both ways. So they have the most female results and the most male results for every section. I think this is because they have a favorite sibling, maybe, and that favorite sibling can be either a male or a female, and they don't pick one over the other for the sake of memorabilia, if that makes sense. The next question asked if they related more to the males or females in their family. Again, we see this trend. They're about even, but those that relate to the males have the most polar results up here and down here, as well as up here and down here. So again, we see that those that are male or relate to males have the most polar results, whereas those that relate to female tend to stick more to the neutral line of 3.0. The next question asked if they had a predominantly male or female family. I had a roughly even spread on this, which I'm really happy about, but those that had a predominantly male family are a little bit less than the others. This one, those that are about even have the polar responses, which did surprise me. I figured they would be about neutral because they didn't have one affecting them over the other, so this does go against my original hypothesis. My next step in my research was to observe classes. So these are the classes I observed. I know there's only 3, don't fret, it's okay. I was really limited in time and resources, so I was only able to observe 3 classes. This first class was a female teacher. She was almost the epitome of perfect. She has the same number of students in class, called on the same number of students, and related with the same number of students. The only difference here is that she had 2 extra female students ask questions, which I don't believe is representative of her as a teacher. I think that they were just more comfortable asking questions because it was a female teacher. So there's that. And the next class was a male teacher, had 10 female students and 16 male students, which it has a gap, but it's not overly descriptive. He called on 0 female students and 1 male student, but because of the split in the attendance, that makes sense. 4 female students asked questions and 9 male students asked questions. This is where the big gap lies. Again, those that have the same gender as the teacher felt more comfortable to ask questions, and I'm not entirely sure why this is. There's a lot of confounding variables from looking at this data, so there's a lot of different explanations for why. This third class has 10 female students and 1 male student. That makes it really difficult to analyze, and I know that. She had a lot of female students called on asking questions and all the things. I really don't think this is representative of her as a teacher. I think it's just that the male student felt outcasted and uncomfortable because he was alone. So the first class, the teacher score, and okay, preface, anything above a 3.0 is a male score, and anything above a 3.0 is a female score. So the first teacher had a male score for failure ability and failure effort. So she believed that male students are likely to fail because of ability and effort. They also had a female score for success ability and success effort. So they believe that females are likely to succeed because of effort and ability, both. This next class had a neutral score for failure ability, which is not uncommon, but it's not exactly popular either. He had a male score for both failure effort and success ability, which is interesting because not a lot had a male score for success ability. He also had a female score for success effort, which fits the trend. The third class had a neutral score for failure ability, like the second class, a male score for failure effort, and a female score for both success ability and success effort. In conclusion, I found a few trends, the most predominant being that males are more likely to fail because of effort, and females are likely to succeed because of effort in the eyes of my participating teachers, and that female participants and those that related to females in their family tended to be more neutral, while the male teachers and those that related more to the males in their family tended to be more polar. Okay, my observation results. So this is the first class. Their ABI averages are listed. She had sons, no daughters, and had both sisters and brothers in a predominantly male family and related most to the males in her family. This goes against my hypothesis because she did have sons, which I hypothesized would have a high result on the ABI averages, and yet she still believed that males are likely to fail because of both ability and effort, and that females are likely to succeed because of ability and effort. The next class had sons, no daughters, related more to the females in their family, and had a roughly even family. This does fit my hypothesis a little bit more than the last one did because the failure ability section is not male, it's neutral, and the success ability section is male, which fits the fact that he has sons. In the third class, she had sons, no daughters, and no siblings. And the fact that she had a neutral failure ability score rather than a male failure ability score does fit the hypothesis because she does have sons. The limitations in my survey, obviously a small sample size. I only had 3 classes that I was able to observe because of time and resources. And I wanted to get national data because I wanted to know about how this changes across the nation. But my survey, I got 58 responses, which I thought was a good survey result. But for nationalized data, it doesn't exactly fit the entire population, if that makes sense. And the next limitation is that my survey results were clustered. I did send it across the nation, but a lot of them, a certain area would pick it up, and then a lot of people of that area would do it. But a lot of the rural areas go unnoticed and unrepresented in my survey. And then self-serving bias. A lot of these teachers likely put that they were neutral for a lot of things that they weren't really neutral for. And so I believe that if they would have been true to themselves or true to what they think, or if we could have somehow observed them in their classroom and done it that way, that we would have gotten a different result. Future directions. This is not the end. There are so many more things that we could do with this. We could create new familial gender question sets, and we could include things like childhood best friends or gender of your dog when you were growing up, and see if that affects how you look at your students. You can use a different variable altogether, like socioeconomic status. That would be a really interesting survey as well. You compare a lot of things with the ABI to create a reference back to what they believe is causing the failure at success of their students. You could also test rural versus urban settings and see if there's a different belief of teachers in rural areas versus urban metropolis areas. I mean, you can do anything with this. Another thing that would be great for the survey is professional development days. You could do tests to determine what the teachers are scoring on the ABI, and then you could go over it and try to fix it or improve it a little bit. And these are my works cited.
All right, Katie, thank you so much. And oral defense panel, question number 1. Katie. How did you determine which results generated by your research method were most important in informing your new understanding?
I definitely think that my survey results were more important than my observation results, partially because I've done surveys before and I've sent them out. This was my first time observing anything, and so I wasn't sure of what I was doing when I walked into that classroom. But the survey results, like you can see, especially the failure ability and failure effort and success effort sections, that really speaks to both the student population and the teaching population and what they believe their students are capable of.
How does your new understanding address the gap in the scholarly conversation?
So back on my literature review slide, I had 3 sources. All of them looked into elementary age students, but none of them looked into high school students. And a lot of them looked in math classes specifically rather than just teaching as a whole. So when I was researching, I wanted to research something for my peers that I could relate to, and I also wanted to do something that covers every topic and every subject in school.
Katie, how did you handle the uncertainty of the research process?
Well, not well, I'll be totally honest with you, but after I got over the initial, like, what am I going to do, I just kind of picked it up and I just rolled with it. And, like, especially with my observations, I walked in, I was nervous, I wrote down everything, and I was frantic, and then I just, like, took a second, I breathed, and I just went through with it, and it was okay.
All right, Katie, thank you so much. All right, open the floor for general questions.
I have a question.
Okay.
Why do you think that the trend was to think more negatively about the male gender?
Honestly, I don't know. When I was starting this, I kind of figured it would be the other way around. And my first research question was basically asking if the teacher would believe that a student would be off topic because they were on their phone, and then I would have like a Likert scale of male to female and do questions like that. And I always figured that when I'm in class, I see more females off topic than males. So I was not expecting that the males would be such a high failure effort score. But I don't really know.
Guys, other questions?
I think, I think it's super cool. It's why I use popsicle sticks, because it was one of the things when I was in my training, like we had to identify, and I definitely did have, if you would have asked me if I would have thought that I would have had a bias or that I would have called on one gender more than another or one whatever, I would have said absolutely not. But after having filmed, this was at a different day when you could film people. And so after having done, so that's why I use popsicle sticks, because I was like, whoa, I really do that. Do you see it? Like, I'm wondering, is this something that you had witnessed, or because you mentioned like just a second ago, like females being more off track. Like, have you noticed that in certain classes there tends to be like they call on boys all the time, or they call on girls all the time, or I'm just curious. Yeah.
Not really. I mean, in most of my classes, they call on the person that's most paying attention, which I guess fits the failure effort, success effort trend, because like I pay attention. I'm a girl. Like, all of my friends pay attention, and they're mostly girls.
Yeah.
Guys get off topic easier. Maybe that's why. I've never really noticed that a teacher called on more males than females. I mean, usually there's popsicle sticks or dice or something in place like that.
Right.
But I don't know. I never really paid attention, I guess.
And I also think it would be really cool to look at like birth order, because I think that that's huge, right? Like
Yeah.
not just the gender, but are you the firstborn or the secondborn, or
True.
was it the middles, or
Very true.
Yeah, because I think that's identifiable. Sometimes we'll be like, are you an
Are you a middle child?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Anyway, cool. It's cool. Yeah.
Do you think that the gender bias that you like observed or found, like, was it inherently bad? And if you assume that it is 100% preventable, how do you think that would change the way a class is taught?
I don't know that it is preventable. I think when I was doing this, I wasn't sure if it was because of the teacher than the teaching population or the student population, because, I mean, if you lose faith in humanity, you lose faith in humanity, whether they're male or female, you know? So,
I'm gonna get that quote or something.
I'm not really sure. Can you repeat your question again? I'm getting confused.
Like, was the gender bias that you observed, would you say was like inherently like, I feel like there's gonna be bias present, and it can be kind of like a natural bias, or it can be, did you perceive the bias that you observed as bad, like, as like,
I mean,
more than a natural amount of bias, I guess is what I'm saying.
for me, the ability questions were more like influential than the effort sections, because effort is what the student puts into it, and ability is what the teacher believes the student is capable of. And for the most part, the ability sections were way more neutral than the effort sections were. So I think the ability speaks to the teacher while the effort speaks to the student more. But for the most part, like, there were a few that had really high and really low scores. In the ability section, for the most part, they stayed relatively neutral, which was good. Yeah?
How do you think you eliminated as much bias that you put into the research? So, like, going to some specific teachers themselves, like the classes that you observed, did you make sure that you didn't have a bias towards any of the teachers that you were trying to look for?
After my first one, I had my set of questions that I look for in every classroom, and I made sure, like, I was paying really close attention, laser focus, guys, I'm serious. I was like, I will not miss anything, I will not jeopardize my research score for this. But I don't think I had any bias going into it, really. But, I mean, nobody really thinks they have any bias going into anything, so.
A lot of, if just playing off what Ms. Mendoza was saying, a lot of us don't realize that we tend to gravitate towards one or the other, and which is why we go to other choices when we call on the students, hopefully. But it would be interesting to have you come into do a survey with at our
I can just,
faculty
like,
meetings
send
or
you guys an
whatever.
email.
Just to see how we do score
Yeah.
for something like that. I mean, because I think we're unaware of a lot of biases that we may have.
Yeah.
It'd also be interesting to see what areas that these surveys are taken from, like, is it a rural farming community? Is it a high, big city? Is there some kind of different bias with geographical situations as well?
I thought about that the other day. I didn't think to put where the participant was from in the survey, but that would have been some really interesting data too. Yeah, the future research, I put that on there. Okay.
All right. Katie, thank you so much.